The movie opens with two police officers, Bobby and Stig, driving in a black car and waiting for a train to pass. As soon as the roads are clear, Stig starts up the car again, and the two continue their journey until they finally come to a stop in front of a diner. Once they leave their car, Stig goes inside the diner to order some coffee while Bobby goes to the bank across the street. While Stig waits impatiently, Bobby manages to get himself a safety deposit box and finally joins Stig in the diner. The two officers argue over what they will have for breakfast until they finally decide. Once the waitress had left, Bobby took a paper and showed it to Stig, telling him about the bank he had just visited. After a brief discussion, Stig goes to the bathroom and uses his lighter to activate the fire alarm, forcing everyone at the diner to rush out. He then leaves the bathroom and throws the lighter on the grill, starting a real fire. As they get out to leave, Bobby and Stig argue about how much they are going to leave as a tip, until finally, Stig manages to convince Bobby to give more. While calmly walking to their car, the two men hear the glasses explode in the diner, but the cops are not affected. After leaving the diner, the two cops drive out of town until they finally arrive at a ranch owned by what seems like criminals. Telling Stig to give him some space, Bobby goes over to the men playing dominoes and takes a seat next to them. He then asks the men about a man he knows there, but they inform him that he was killed, showing him a bag containing the man's head. Although upset by the matter, Bobby laughs the situation off until he is called by the boss, who is waiting for him in the stables. After a brief conversation, Bobby passes the boss, Poppy, a bag full of passports as per their agreement, but he is disappointed when he is handed a bag full of money instead of the cocaine they had agreed to. Handing the money back, Bobby tells Poppy to keep the passport and money, reminding him to give him the product when it's available, and insisting that Poppy owes him until then. The two men share an agreement nod and head out to find Stig arguing with one of the men regarding a shooting game they were playing. Approaching Stig, Bobby warns him to calm himself, telling him about the head in the bag. Realizing they should leave, Stig makes a grand exit by beating the men on their sport and walks off after exchanging some insults. On their way back, Stig and Bobby are apprehended at the border and taken to the police station. While they're being questioned, Bobby refuses to speak with the police until his lawyer arrives, while Stig denies ever knowing Poppy. A few minutes later, the officer questioning Bobby leaves the room and he is left with the detective, Jessup. When they're finally alone, Bobby tells the detective that he was unable to get the cocaine because Poppy went back on his word. Jessup is worried that Bobby has gotten too involved with the crime family and considers pulling him out, but Bobby argues that he has worked too hard to be removed from the case. He begs Jessup to give him more time, forcing Jessup to give him 2 more weeks to catch Poppy. That night, Bobby spends the night with his control officer, Deb, sleeping together secretly so it doesn't affect the work. Bobby confesses to Deb that the man he was trying to flip in the crime family was dead and begs her not to tell Jessup. He then asks her to allow him to rob the bank as the money his dead informant had was being kept there, explaining that it could tie Poppy to the crime. Although she has her doubts, Deb agrees to go along with Bobby's plan. The following morning, Bobby goes over to Stig's house and tells him he was ready to rob the bank. Excited by the change of heart, Stig immediately agrees and the two begin their work. The next few scenes take us back to how the movie started and why they had burned down the diner. Bobby had made a case that the police would be too close if the diner that sells the best donuts in town remained functional. That night, Bobby tells Deb about the operation they had planned and informs her about the time, warning her to arrive as per their agreement. Meanwhile, Stig is waiting on the side of the road for his Navy officer to arrive. Stig is hiding his true intentions from Bobby and has not disclosed that he was sent by the Navy to bust Poppy. After receiving weapons and other materials they need from his officer, Stig gets a brief rundown of the plan and heads home. The following morning, Stig and Robert arrive at the police station and lock all the police in the cells. The two men then head to the bank and make sure everyone is sitting on the floor before starting the robbery. Once Stig blows up the safes, the two men are shocked to find more money than they expected. Feeling nervous about what happened, they decide to take it all and drive out to the desert. Bobby's confused as to why Deb had not arrived with the cavalry, but refrains from saying anything. Once they stop in the middle of nowhere, Bobby attempts to take his partner down, but Stig beats him to him, giving him a flesh wound. While Bobby is on the ground, Stig notices the police badge in Bobby's hand and begins to confront him. Angry at being cheated, Stig abandons Bobby on the road and drives off with the money. He then heads to his leading officer, Harold's home, and shows him the stacks of money he had gotten. Although Stig tries to find out who the money belonged to, Harold refrains from giving him a direct answer, instead asking about Bobby, who he had wanted to be killed. Stig admits that he had not finished him off, but assures Harold that his cover was safe and that Bobby wouldn't be able to track him. After heading out of the house and stacking all the money in the car, Stig begins to have his suspicions about Harold, keeping his guard up. He then suddenly notices one of the men trying to attack him and quickly jumps into action. He manages to evade Harold and his men, driving off with the truck stacked with the money. Meanwhile, Bobby walks in the desert for several hours before he is stopped by two locals on a rover. Pulling out his gun, Bobby confiscates the vehicle and drives into town, meeting with a corrupt vet who patches him up. After getting his wounds bandaged up, Bobby goes to meet Deb and tells her about what happened. He then informs her that he was going to go to Stig's apartment to speak to his old partner. When he finally arrives at the apartment, Bobby finds the place empty and begins to call out for Stig. Suddenly, the phone rings and he hears Stig's voice come through, informing him that he was aware of everything. While the two try to gouge where they stood, people looking for Stig arrive and force him to help Robert by firing on his friends in the Navy. After a brief shootout, Bobby manages to escape and heads over to Jessup's house. When he arrives, Bobby is shocked to see strange men in the house and attempts to fight back, but Earl, the owner of the money Bobby and Stig had stolen, shoots Jessup and forces Bobby to sit up for a conversation. Earl threatens to shoot Bobby, but the DEA agent remains adamant that he doesn't know anything about the money. Angry, Earl refuses to believe Bobby and frames him for the murder of his boss. He informs Bobby that he will go to jail for a long time unless Bobby brings him all of the money they have taken. Angry that he was forced to witness his boss being murdered, Bobby goes over to Poppy's house and holds him at gunpoint, asking him whose money they had stolen. Before he could get an answer, Stig arrives and kidnaps Poppy. Two men then begin a car chase, fighting amongst each other. After a long and exhausting fight, the two men decide to work together to figure out why they are being framed. They then take Poppy to a safe place so they can question the old man. Once they had him tied up on a chair, Poppy reveals that Bobby and Stig had stolen money from the CIA, explaining that it was a payment for the revenue they took from him in exchange for allowing him to use their plane to transport his product. During the interrogation, Deb arrives, and it is revealed that they had been hiding out in her garage. Panicking, Deb accuses Bobby of putting her life in danger by bringing a cartel leader to their house. Stig gives Bobby and Deb some privacy to discuss the situation, but the group is attacked by Stig's old Navy buddies. During the chase, Poppy escapes and manages to call his people. While on the road, Bobby questions Deb on how they managed to know where they would be. Before she could answer, their car was hit by Poppy's people, who captured them. Taking him to his ranch, Poppy tortures them and attempts to murder them until they offer to give him all the money they stole. After Bobby receives a surprise visit from the CIA agent, he decides to let Bobby and Stig bring him the money. Before they leave, Poppy shows them Deb, who had been kidnapped, and threatens to kill her if they don't return in 24 hours. He then forces them to cross the border along with other illegal immigrants. After they finally make it across, the two men steal a car while discussing the whereabouts of the money. After informing him about the hotel where Harold had dropped off the money, Bobby remembers that he had seen Deb in that hotel. Although they find the coincidence strange, they decide to go through with their plan, breaking into a naval base so Stig can speak to their general. Although Stig manages to make it to the office and informs the general about what happened, he is disappointed when he is told that there was nothing that could be done. The general then warns Stig never to return to the base, and he would not acknowledge the robbery, ordering his soldiers to escort Stig out. Meanwhile, Bobby breaks into Harold's office and confronts the officer, finding out that Deb had betrayed him. Shocked by the news and discovering that the money was kept with Deb all along, Bobby creates an explosion which causes a large distraction. After heading out of the base, Bobby calls Poppy, who warns him about being late. Poppy then gives the phone to Deb, who apologizes for what she had done before the cartel leader shoots her. Devastated by what happened, Bobby meets up with Stig and informs him about Deb. Angry, Stig decides to go to Mexico to get revenge for Deb. After the two men separate, Bobby goes home and finds Deb's body. Although he is heartbroken by what he sees, the ring on Deb's finger helps him discover where she has hidden the money. The following day, Stig calls Poppy, Harold, and the CIA to a standoff, promising to give them the money. Suddenly, Bobby arrives with all the money and offers it to the CIA, blowing it up in front of them. Angry by what Bobby had done, a gunfight breaks out, and all of the criminals attempt to take out Bobby and Stig. As all of the criminals fight each other, Bobby and Stig use the opportunity to take them out one by one. After finally killing Harold and Earl, the two men head out of the ranch, and Bobby gets his payback by giving Stig the flesh wound he had given him. The two men laugh at what happened as Bobby carries his friend away from the place. A few days later, Bobby and Stig are having breakfast at a diner when Bobby implies that he had never blown up the real money. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.